She arrived before the sun came up. Every single morning, without fail, she was already there when the first lights flickered on inside the training facility at the Naval Special Warfare Center in Coronado, California. The gym smelled like rubber mats, iron, and old sweat, a smell that most people found uncomfortable. She breathed it in like fresh air. Her name, as far as anyone there knew, was Elena Vasquez. She was 34 years old. She had short dark hair that she always pulled back tightly before she started working. She wore plain black training clothes, no logos, no bright colors, nothing that called attention to herself. She carried a worn green duffel bag that looked like it had traveled a long distance and never fully recovered. She had civilian contractor access to the gym. That was not unusual. A small number of non-military personnel were permitted to use the facility under a specific access program. Elena had signed the right paperwork. She had the right badge. She arrived, trained, and left. No problems, no complaints, no conversations that lasted longer than a few words. And yet, within her first week, people had begun to notice her. Not because she was loud. Not because she demanded attention. Quite the opposite. They noticed her because of the way she moved. She did not train the way a person trains to look good or feel healthy. She trained the way a person trains when they have been taught by someone who did not accept mistakes. Her pull-ups were perfect, full hang at the bottom, chin clear of the bar at the top, controlled on the way down. No bouncing. No rushing. She wore a weighted vest that added 40 pounds to her body. She ran in military boots, not running shoes. When she did push-ups, she counted under her breath in a language no one could quite identify. The SEALs who trained alongside her, big, disciplined, serious men who had survived some of the hardest selection processes in the world, would glance over at her and then look away quickly, the way people do when they see something that makes them feel slightly embarrassed about their own effort. One younger petty officer started calling her the Ghost. Not to her face. Just among the guys, quietly, with a kind of respect that comes when words fail. She heard it once. She smiled. Just a small smile, barely there, and then she went back to her set. No one knew where she had come from. No one asked. In that world, you did not ask a person to explain themselves. You watched what they did, and you made your judgment based on that. By that measure, Elena Vasquez had already earned more respect than most people earn in a year. Senior Chief Petty Officer Daniel Reese had been in Naval Special Warfare for 22 years. He had done tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. He had spent 4 years attached to a joint task force that operated in places that did not appear on any public briefing and would never be discussed at any dinner table. He was 51 years old, built lean and hard, with close-cropped gray hair and the kind of quiet, permanent alertness that never fully leaves a person who has spent decades in dangerous places. Reese was not someone who made assumptions. He was not someone who jumped to conclusions or let his imagination run ahead of the facts. He had been trained, carefully, repeatedly, over many years, to observe first, interpret second, and act only when the situation required it. He first noticed Elena during her third week at the facility. He had been watching her train, not out of suspicion, but out of professional admiration. She was doing farmer carries, heavy kettlebells in each hand, walking measured distances across the gym floor, and her grip had not broken after 40 meters. That was not nothing. He filed it away. Then, on a Tuesday morning in March, she came in with her hair in a tight braid instead of her usual pulled-back style. She was doing barbell work near the rack closest to the window. The morning light was coming in at a low angle, the way it does in early spring, and it caught the left side of her neck clearly. Reese saw the scar. It was small. Most people would not have noticed it at all, or would have assumed it was from something ordinary, a minor surgery, an old injury. It was a neat, circular mark, slightly raised at the edges, sitting just below and behind her left ear. Reese had seen that exact kind of scar twice in his career. Once on a recovered intelligence asset who had been held in Eastern Europe for 11 months. Once on a colleague who had been extracted by a special recovery team after being held by a hostile network in North Africa. Both times, the scar had been left behind after the surgical removal of a subcutaneous tracking device, a small implant placed under the skin without the person's knowledge or consent, used by certain organizations to monitor their captives. He set down his coffee cup very carefully. He sat still for a moment. Then he picked up his cup again, stood up, and walked across the gym floor. He waited until she finished her set. He did not interrupt. He did not rush. When she stepped back from the bar and reached for her water bottle, he pulled up a nearby bench and sat down close enough to speak quietly, not so close as to crowd her. He said, calmly and simply, "That scar below your ear. Extraction site." Elena did not flinch. She did not step back. She did not look confused or offended. She simply looked at him with steady eyes for a moment, reading him the way a person reads a page of text, taking in every word before responding. Then she said, "You have seen one before." It was not a question. Reese nodded once. What followed was not dramatic. There were no raised voices, no sudden revelations, no emotional outbursts. It was a conversation between two people who both understood the value of saying only what needed to be said. Reese identified himself, his name, his rank, his unit. Elena listened without interrupting. She watched his hands, his posture, his breathing. She was evaluating him just as carefully as he had evaluated her. Then, slowly, she began to speak. Her name was not Elena Vasquez. That identity had been constructed for her by a unit within the Defense Intelligence Agency, as part of a reintegration process that helped former operatives rebuild civilian lives after classified service. Her real name was in files that very few people were permitted to read. What she was willing to say was this: she had spent nearly 4 years working as an intelligence operative embedded in networks that moved across the Balkans and the Horn of Africa. She had lived under different names in different countries. She had built relationships over months and years with people whose trust was nearly impossible to earn. She had passed information through channels so carefully designed that many of her own handlers had never met her in person. She had been captured. She did not say how. She did not say by whom. She said only that she had been held for a long time, in conditions that were recorded in classified documents, and that she had survived. Not by luck. By training, by patience, and by choices she would carry with her for the rest of her life. During the time she was held, a medical procedure had been performed on her without her consent. She had not known at the time what had been implanted. She found out during her debriefing, which had lasted 6 months after her extraction. The device was removed 8 months after she returned. The scar was 3 years old. She had never spoken about any of this publicly. She had no interest in doing so. She had come to this gym, specifically, because it was one of the few places she had found where no one looked at her with pity. No one lowered their voice when she walked in. No one asked how she was doing in that careful, worried way that told her they expected the answer to be bad. Here, people looked at what you could do, not at what had happened to you. Here, she said, nobody asks if I am okay. They just let me work. Reese was quiet for a moment. He looked at the floor, then back at her. That is not a bad reason, he said. He thought about the conversation for 3 days. He did not tell anyone what she had shared with him. He had no reason to, and no authority to. She had broken no rules. She had committed no wrong. She was a free person, rebuilding her life in the way that made sense to her. But he thought about the way she trained. The precision of it. The discipline. And beneath that discipline, something else, a kind of restlessness, the way a person moves when they're still looking for somewhere to belong. He recognized it. He had felt it himself, after his second tour, when he came home and realized that nothing in ordinary life quite fit anymore. The body adjusts. The mind takes longer. Sometimes it takes years. Sometimes it takes finding the right environment. On Thursday morning, he approached her again. He told her that there was a small, unofficial program connected to the Naval Special Warfare Reintegration Network. It was not advertised. It did not appear in any public documents. It was a framework, a training group, a schedule, a small number of people with classified operational backgrounds who were in various stages of transitioning back to civilian life. It was not therapy. It was not a support group. It was simply structure, and people who understood each other without needing to explain everything. He asked if she wanted to be connected to it. Elena looked at him for a long moment. She looked at her hands. They were strong hands, marked by years of physical work, steady and still in her lap. Will they know what I actually did? She asked. Only what you choose to tell them, he said. She was quiet for a while. The gym was filling up around them. Weights clanged. Ropes slapped the floor. Someone was breathing hard on the rowing machine across the room. Then she nodded. It was a small nod, barely a movement, but it was the clearest thing she had done in weeks. What came together over the following months, through careful conversations and the patient rebuilding of trust, was a story much larger than one woman in a gym. Elena had been part of a program that identified and trained female operatives for environments where male agents could not operate without drawing immediate attention. In certain parts of the world, in certain communities, a woman could move through spaces that were entirely closed to men. Medical clinics, domestic networks, marketplaces, schools. Places where information lived and passed between people every day, invisible to anyone who was not present. She had spent years inside those spaces. She had built identities, cultivated sources, and delivered intelligence that contributed to operations she was never briefed on and would never be credited for. The nature of that work required complete invisibility, not just from enemies, but from almost everyone on her own side as well. When she was taken, those who captured her did not know exactly what they had. That uncertainty had likely saved her life. She had maintained her cover even under significant pressure, revealing nothing that could confirm their suspicions. It was one of the most difficult things a human being can be asked to do, and she had done it, alone, without the possibility of help for a very long time. What was discovered during her debriefing surprised even the analysts who reviewed it. At some point during her captivity, she had managed to pass a single piece of information to the outside world through a method so subtle that it was not even recognized as intentional communication until months later, when a junior analyst noticed an irregularity in a document and traced it back to its source. That piece of information had contributed to the protection of people who would never know her name. She had received no public recognition for any of it. There had been no ceremony, no commendation pinned to her chest in front of a gathering of people. Her name did not appear in any press release. Her story did not appear in any article. She had served entirely in the dark, and she had returned to the dark. She had chosen the SEAL gym because she had researched it carefully. She knew the culture of the place. She knew that in that environment, what mattered was what you showed up and did, not what you claimed about yourself. She had spent years proving herself in situations where no one was watching and no credit would ever come. Showing up and doing the work was the only language she still fully trusted. Daniel Reese, speaking later to someone who had been present during one of their conversations, said this: "I have trained alongside some of the hardest and most capable people in the world. I have stood next to men in situations that most people will never come close to understanding. And I will tell you honestly, I have never seen anyone carry themselves the way she does. Not despite what she went through. Because of it. What she became on the other side of that experience is not broken. It is something else entirely. I do not have the right word for it. But I recognize it when I see it." Elena connected with the reintegration network that Reese recommended. She trained with the group for nearly 2 years. She never talked much, but she showed up every time, and over months, something in her posture changed, not softer, but more settled. Less like a person waiting for the next threat and more like a person who had finally found ground beneath her feet. She eventually moved into a role that used her language skills and her operational background. The details of that role are not publicly available. She still trains in the early morning, before most people are awake. She still does not use the mirror. And if you were ever in the same gym as her, and if the light happened to fall at the right angle, you might notice the small, faded mark below her left ear, a circle, barely visible, 3 years old. Most people would walk past it without a second thought. One man recognized it for exactly what it was. And because of that moment, one person paying attention, one quiet question asked the right way, a woman who had spent years being invisible to the right people finally became visible to the right one. Sometimes that is all it takes. One person who knows what to look for. One question asked with respect, not curiosity. One small nod that changes the direction of a life. She had survived the hardest things alone. She did not have to do what came next alone. And that, in the end, was what made all the difference.